you, Senator. And now we're going to have Senator Hickenlooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is a pleasure just because 45 years ago, I don't want to date myself, I did take a class on industrial minerals. And so this is now coming full circle. And Mr. Haddock, I appreciate a lot of your points. You worked for many years for my first mentor, investor, Jim Owen. So you were fortunate in that. And then I did start out as a hard rock geologist. And certainly I spent enough time mucking around in bentonite and have seen it both in terms of drilling and extractions, but also in terms of using it as findings for making of beer, which I ended up doing after the geologic. But I think it's interesting we're seeing such a broad difference. I think it's very instructive between a bentonite mine and a gold mine and what the costs are and how you even think about that. And I think that's really does suggest, I mean, just as we wouldn't create a tax system as exactly the same as we do for oil and gas, it does begin to create that image of how would we go about this. And I thought, Ms. Sweeney, I'd start with you just to ask, obviously to meet our clean energy goals, and the reports such as the IEA earlier this year showed dramatic level of scale up if we're going to get critical minerals production worldwide to keep pace with what we really need. And I believe, I'm someone who believes there should be some level of royalty there. But I thought you might, if you could just take a moment talking about the differences between and how it might pencil out between a gross royalty and a net royalty. And you don't have to go through the different minerals, but just because I think some of the people listening might not have the same familiarity that you and I do.
Right. Thank you so much for that question. There is a large difference, and I think that Rich talked about it in his testimony as well. The gross royalty doesn't allow the deductions for the processing and the refining, which are really a large part of what provides the value for hard rock minerals compared to coal or oil and gas. And if a gross value royalty is imposed, mining companies are required to pay that royalty even when the mine is operating at a loss, since a royalty is assessed without consideration of the difficulty or the cost of processing the materials. There have been quite a few studies, including by the Department of Interior itself, looking at gross versus net royalties, and the department has concluded that gross royalty would result in significant job losses, losses to state and federal treasury, mine closures, and discouragement of new mines. And I think, as Senator Cortez Masto said, it also encourages operators to leave lower grade or in the ground, thereby wasting public resources.
Great. I appreciate that. Ms. Hanna, I've always been struck that we still don't really know how much we produce of so many of these different minerals. I remember that 45 years ago, and I don't think it's changed at all. So independent from a taxpayer responsibility perspective, don't we need a full accounting of how much we produce in this country if we're going to have a policy grounded in reality?
Yes, thanks for the question, Senator Hickenlooper. We definitely need transparency more, and we need to have that tracking so that we can really understand what is the value of the minerals coming off federal land, what production looks like. It's hard to get assessments of what the impacts would be if we don't have that information and when we set these royalties. But I do think that we have sufficient information to know that the industry, and as I think everyone on the panel is saying, can absorb a royalty, can handle the impact of these new revenue streams and still be very successful and profitable. And I appreciate your mentioning the differences with various minerals, and we recognize that as well. And we're open to conversations about how to get those revenue streams for taxpayers.
Great.
But accounting is first. How many do we have on federal lands is important.
And just quickly to finish up, Mr. Wood, there hasn't been that much discussion of trout and wildlife and habitat yet. But I do come from a state that is riddled with abandoned mines and has all kinds of problems, both in those designated as Superfund sites, but especially those that aren't. And we know that it takes resources in mind. I thought you mentioned it earlier, but speak a little bit more about the Good Samaritan legislation and how that could really be a first step, not a total solution, but a first step.
Thank you, sir. Just to expand on your point, there's GAO 2 years ago estimated there were 550,000 abandoned mine sites just on public land. So it's a massive problem. It's huge in Colorado, which also has tremendous trout fisheries. It's over an assessment we did listed over 125,000 miles of stream across the country that are affected by abandoned mine waste.
Wow.
So what we're trying to do, and we've been working with industry and working with conservation groups to try to create a pilot program that would ease some of the liability restrictions that are tied to the Clean Water Act and the Superfund law that I mentioned. Just 15 pilots that would allow us to prove the concept that we know how to go out and clean abandoned mines. It doesn't answer the financing issue, but at least it would build confidence that we can begin to tackle these problems.
Great. I couldn't agree more. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks for yielding back.
I gave you all the time I had. I didn't have any, but I would have given you all the time I had.
I thought I was seeing things here. Now we'll have Senator